Hello, students, and welcome to week 2 of Soul Care and Family Crises. Um, I got my bangs fixed before starting to record, so that's a plus. This week, we're going to focus completely on soul care so that we can be useful to a family in crisis. So we're actually going to be just flying through chapters 6 through the end of the Ortberg Soul Keeping. Now, this is where I'm going to try to convince you that, in fact, your soul does need care. And it's hard to, people in ministry is hard to sometimes convince you of that. But let's kind of take a look at what the text tells us. Give me just a second. And I'm going to go ahead and skip the part of the PowerPoint, which is the review, which you may find helpful in this week's quiz, which covers last week's reading. And we're going to jump right to the soul care piece. And this is what you're going to focus on for your self-care plan, which is due this week. Okay. So yes, in fact, we know that the soul is built with need. It's the nature of the soul to need. And the needy man actually turns to many things before turning to God. So think about things that you value. Think about things that are priorities in your life. Are those things good things, but things that can actually turn you from God? Are we practicing idolatry? The truth is that the need for mankind, excuse me if I'm not being inclusive in my language, but the soul needs, and what the soul needs is God. So that is something that we want to accept as fact. And instead of fighting it and saying, oh, I don't need, to actually turn to the true God who fulfills our souls. So how do we turn that over? Well, first of all, we've got to look at what are my needs truly. We're going to explore each of those as we go. But just like the stream that we talked about that had a keeper in this story about the village in the mountains, we are the soul keepers of the stream of our souls. That should be a sobering type of understanding, a sobering thought. And chapter 7 actually begins with the quote, I and no one else am responsible for the condition of my soul. The condition. Ultimately, God is the creator of our soul. We, however, are responsible for the condition it is in. And one of my mentors that I may have mentioned in the last lecture says that that how we respond in crisis indicates the condition of our soul. So keep that in mind. If you have a soul that is weary, that is depleted, you don't have anything to draw from. And what are we to draw from? The stream that flows from God. So we put off and we say just one more project, just one more visit, just one more, right, before I'll take a break. And this is exactly the journey that Ortberg describes throughout his life. And each time he goes back to Dallas's little cabin in Box Canyon, and Dallas just lays another heavy truth to him. The second visit was one in which he started to get depleted. And the leaders of his church said, you will take a sabbatical. It's been 7 years, take 7 weeks. Churches who don't offer sabbaticals are kind of short-sighted, and they're not really aware of how soul care is important for their leader as much as anyone else, and the heavy responsibility that comes with that. So here we are. If I'm responsible for the condition of my soul, I may turn to a place of saying, "Oh, I don't need to take care of my soul. I've got a day. I've got a half day off here." And this is kind of where tongue-in-cheek Ortberg says, "Well, it seems like by some magic, the law of consequences doesn't apply to us. This is denial. Say, okay, I can spend what I want, and I won't get in debt. I can." And in the story of David and Bathsheba, I can go to the rooftop and just look and then step back into my house, and that's it. And I think we know the end of that story. So what we have is we're meant to be with God and to be connected to one another. We have obstacles that keep us from being in that mode. So when you come to the place where, Dallas is saying, well, what you actually need is to let your days be such that you are experiencing deep contentment, joy, and confidence in your everyday life with God. He's not a quiet time. We know that we can get into a place where that's just a checkbox. We mentioned that a little bit of that last time. So what we want to be doing is to begin living as though we were in God's presence in heaven. What is it going to be like there? We're going to be ultimately fulfilled. We're going to be transformed. But in the here and now, we've got to be in training for eternity. So the soul is needy. The soul needs a keeper, and the soul needs a center. That means, where is my rock? Do I place my rock, my well-being, my safety in my possessions, in my relationships, in myself? And am I the person who, in fact, determines where I go when I need something? I'll make the decision without consulting anyone, without bringing it to God. Think about this. When something surprises you, distresses you, even pleases you, if there's an extreme, where do you turn? Is your first thought to say, God, what do I do? And not just ask the question, but to stop, listen, seek, knock. Or do I say, well, this is what I should do? Or is it, maybe I need to ask my best friend. Maybe I need to talk to the pastor of the church. Well, those are good things, and we're supposed to seek godly counsel. But have we gone to God first? Remember that we are created as eternal beings, and we want to live that way. The center then rests on God, and our reliance, our safety rests there. And so it's a good and healthy thing. If you've done any kind of study in psychology, you've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Starts with personal safety as a foundation. Without that, you have nothing to build on for the next thing, which then takes you up a level into more than surviving, and eventually up to thriving, and then becoming fully what we are meant to be. So we've got to have that foundation. And if we don't have a center, if God is not that rock, then we're uncertain. We feel vulnerable. We are impatient. We're second guessing ourselves. And we find our way by other means that seem easier, that take less time. But if we continue in the practice of being centered on God and placing our well-being in God, then we've got some place to rest, to be free of uncertainty. And just like the child mentioned in the story that Ortberg tells us about his friend, he used to say, "Hold you, daddy," put his arms up. What is it? What do you do when a toddler reaches for you like this? You just got to reach for him, right? That's a heart's desire. That is how God feels about us. And if we are in need and in terror or in pain or just need connection, we reach up. And this guy tells about when his son would say, "Hold you, daddy, hold you, daddy." And this young man, this child grows into a man and has the devastating experience of his wife leaving him. Once again, the son turns to his father. And even though he doesn't use the same gestures or toddler's words, it's the same feeling that a father's heart reaches out and that we instinctively reach for him when we have not allowed other things to become our center. So pay attention to the things that rob you of feeling free to do that, to reach for him. We cannot be a complete soul without that connection to God. Okay. Keep these in mind as you construct your soul care plan, your self-care. The soul needs a future. Where do we go? If in fact there were no life after death, it would be kind of a free-for-all, wouldn't it? You know, my time is ticking. I'm going to grab all that I have. When in truth, God has set eternity in our hearts, and that is what we ultimately long for. And, you know, even an atheist has a sense of right and wrong. Well, stealing isn't right. Of course, we're talking about a different worldview of what ultimately happens, but it's just not beneficial to me to steal because I could go to jail. When in fact, and you know, there may be a sense of, well, that can hurt another person. That's not good. Where does that come from? Word says all good things come from the Father. And even an atheist is made in the image of God. And somewhere in there, there is just a sense. Okay, so the soul needs attachment to God. That life lived with God as you come and go, being aware of his presence day to day. And if you haven't read it's a pretty short work called Practicing the Presence by Brother Lawrence. You need to read that. It's humbling. Who was this guy? He was the pot scrubber at the monastery. Uneducated, but he went in and did his work as for the Lord, literally. And he talks about the joys of his days with God. Now, we know that if we are detached from God, what happens? We can survive just fine. Kind of like the chicken in the microwave. We could even see that the devil lays off of us because he says, I don't need to tempt this person. If they're just a little bit off course, instead of being fully aligned with God vertically, all I need to do is just get them a few degrees off course. And where do you end up? Miles and miles from God. Detachment leads to depletion. What about rest? Okay, so John Ortberg gets a sabbatical, and he sees that he's kind of likes himself a little bit better. He's actually not as impatient as he had been, which is how the leaders of his church realized, I think it's time for a break. Now, rest is about slowing down. And it is in slowing down that God is able to connect with us. When we are not distracted by many things, when we have quiet moments and we are fully focused on him. And let's see, we've got a quote here at 134. What happens to the hurried soul? There's a little chart. When we're busy, we got a full schedule. What was it Dallas Willard said was the enemy of the spiritual life is hurry. So looking at this chart, busyness is a full schedule, leaves us preoccupied. Where does God have room to reach in? We've got a lot of activities. Science shows that you truly cannot multitask. The brain does not focus on two things at once. Now, you can talk about driving somewhere. There are some automatic functions that the brain is able to continue while, say, you're talking on the phone while you're driving. I remember seeing it may have been some sort of a news magazine. It might have been 60 Minutes, where they actually followed this gentleman who was very accomplished in his career, and he had this 45-minute drive. On the drive, he's talking on his phone, he's hitting the button to talk to the next person and the next person, and as he goes, he gets to his destination and say, okay, how much of the drive do you actually remember? So we don't divide our attention. And in fact, research also shows that if you are focused on one thing and then something distracts you, it takes you a little while to get back to that place. So remember, we are not human doings, we are human beings. And God is ultimately more concerned about who we become than what we achieve. We have an intrinsic worth. So when you look at what society may consider somebody, this is what drives me crazy, is when you'll hear, Steve Jobs is worth, $4 billion. Well, what about a nonverbal autistic child who can't communicate? God doesn't see a difference there. And when we do, we've got a problem. How do we start to rest? First of all, knowing that we have to slow down and listen. The spiritual disciplines include silence and solitude. So if we can tweak our thinking and say, doing nothing is doing something. And when I'm working with couples, I think I might have mentioned before, slow is fast. When you're in a relationship and you start doing things automatically, ultimately you end up in a conflict that doesn't matter how it starts, it always goes the same way. But the slowing down keeps us in focus, keeps us focused, and we focus on God. Now, the brain is designed to move from one thing to the other quickly in case of something threatening us, in case of something that needs our attention immediately. But we want to be in the practice of coming back and remaining. And it is in that space that God is more able to work with us when we're focused on Him. Remember going down to the basement. Now, rest in achievement. If I am only as good as the last thing I've done, I am saying that I am enough. But if I say I am only as good as God has intended for me to be, in other words, I am only worth what God sees me as. And ultimately, my worth rests in Him, and He is enough. If I am the vine, if He is the vine and I am the branches, apart from Him, I can do nothing. When your soul is at rest, your will is undivided and obeys God with joy. Your mind has thoughts of truth and beauty. You desire what is wholesome and good. What does the distraction do? What catches your attention? That's what gets it. And that's why we see so much inattentiveness, such a reduction in how quickly we see images. TikTok, I think that's a 7-second video. That's captured the kids now. I know, I really do sound old. But notice what you see in media, television, whatever, today, and then go back to, say, a program, a TV show from, say, the 50s. Slow pace. You don't see a lot of changes in the scene. Slow is actually showing you probably more than those quick back and forth things, or at least slowing down is deeper. Okay. Now, the soul needs freedom. We are freed not to sin. When we seek fulfillment, satisfaction, safety in anything but God, we fall into sin. And sin ultimately leads to destruction. So in obedience to God, we actually are freed from the consequences of sin. This is kind of that, yes, I know, another Mystery Men clip. This is kind of a thing with my family. We've got tons of quotes from Mystery Men, and yeah, we're geeks. You know, I admit it, we're geeks. That's kind of how God created me, as long as it's not something that gets between me and God. This is one that I just love. So whatever your thoughts are about Billy Graham, this is the headstone of Ruth, his wife's grave. So if we're thinking about we are actually in preparation for eternity, she's got this quote, "End of construction. Thank you for your patience." I think that's beautiful. Okay. What the soul needs. The soul needs blessing, and God blesses us. In turn, we want to be a blessing to others. There's a sermon that the pastor of my church from many years ago preached that people still talk about, and that's about being a blessing to others. When you pass someone on the street, make eye contact, give them a smile. If you're going through the checkout line, look at the person who is there to help you. Make eye contact. Speak a word of blessing. You don't just kind of and go about your way. And this is something that I love to do now. And as an introvert, not necessarily something I was excited about doing in the beginning. But now, I can look at that person and say, whatever her name tag is, Jane, I really appreciate your help today. Love your hairstyle. Or, wow, you must be really tired of seeing this bacon that's on sale coming through here. And just this is a person, acknowledge, connect on some level. And especially if you see stress on their face, acknowledge that, validate them. A soul is worth blessing. Now, we have in our brains neurons that actually help us to read the other person. They're called mirror neurons. Those are there for a reason. It's not just that we're able to read and use that to our advantage. We're wired so that our neurons come into alignment and that we are kind of in sync. There is more than just verbal communication happening there. There's really something happening. And this is where I like to talk about the cookie thief. If you've never seen this little book, it's a children's book. And what we've got to do is say, okay, we see something and we instantly, the brain is wired to kind of say, okay, this is what this is. If we slow ourselves down, we can find a whole lot more. The story of the cookie thief is this person who went to the airport and picked up a box of cookies to take with them on their flight. They set that down for a minute to answer their phone or whatever. They look back and there's this guy sitting there with that box of cookies and is pulling one out to eat it. What is going on here? So they sat down and said, they're not going to get away with this. So they sat there and just kind of glared at the person. So they ate the cookie. All right. So then this person reached in and got a cookie themselves and bit into it. Pretty soon, and the other person just kind of smiled, reached in, got another cookie. Same thing. Ate a second cookie. I'll eat one of my own cookies too. Well, the more they sat there, the more this person was seething, just ready to just blow up. And all of a sudden, this guy picks up the box of cookies and walks off to get to his flight. Now this person is just enraged. And then somebody says, is that your package right there? Do you mind if I sit down over here? Guess what? Identical box of cookies. This was their cookies. So this person was actually the cookie thief themselves. We want to be careful about reading something, instantly thinking this is what it is. Slowing down, looking for more, being a blessing in doing that. Okay, so the soul seeks satisfaction. It's created with a need for satisfaction. What is the satisfaction? Only in God does my soul receive what it needs. We become dissatisfied with ourselves, and there's this inner critic that says, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. I've got to do more. I've got to be more. I've got to have more. I've got to say more. So we've got this craving. But that is not truly what we were meant to do. We're meant to be satisfied in God. And if you go back to scripture, when it says he gives us the desires of our hearts, the word desire is not an evil thing. We were created to have the capacity to love beauty, to need affirmation. Those are holy desires. So when you hear the word desire, we go to the negative. And I would challenge you to say, okay, God has placed a desire in my heart for, maybe it's something that he's called us to. Remember, we're created as caretakers of the planet, which means that we are placed above the mammals in creation. And so we've got capacities that are above what these creatures have. What do they desire? They desire food. They desire sleep. They desire sex. They desire territory, whatever. Can they actually appreciate beauty? Can they truly be altruistic, meaning giving with nothing in return? When we fall into sin seeking satisfaction, it's when we step outside of seeking satisfaction in God and in what he has instilled in us. God has instilled in my heart a desire to help people who are having emotional anguish. It's hard work because you do feel the sadness and the ache and the pain and the trauma. But the satisfaction comes whenever I can step back and say, God, you've got to do this. Please use me here. And then you see it happen. That's a beautiful thing. And that satisfies my soul. Okay, gratitude. A lot of us have heard of gratitude journals. It's a good practice. I've used it with some clients when they're saying, why does this keep happening to me? What's, this kind of this downward negative spiral. So, okay, so every day this week, write something in your life that you're grateful for. And it can be because our brains automatically go to the negative. We have to train our brains to choose the positive. So the brain research shows that we're healthier and happier when we think positively, when we don't follow the brain's default to automatic negative thoughts. So, and think about that. Can you think of a worship service where you did not express gratitude to God for whatever blessing comes to mind or whatever he shows you? When we feel like we should be receiving something, we get stuck in entitlement. And what that happens to do is then it flips us over into cognitive distortions because we're seeing out of distorted lenses. When we live out of those self-defense mechanisms that we discussed in the previous lecture, when you've got defense mechanisms that aren't defending you from an unsafe situation, they're actually overdone, overused, and we're now operating out of that fragmented soul, that disintegrated soul. And so that's when we start thinking, I'm no good, this doesn't matter, I don't have to feel this. And if we follow that path without being checked, we can end up in an extreme of criminal thinking. How do you think that the Nazis that Hitler got an entire country to have concentration camps and executions? One rationalization. Well, it wouldn't be so bad if we had those people move to a certain part of the city. To, well, those people shouldn't be working here. To, right? Just a small piece at a time, one step after the other, and there's where you end up with atrocity. Okay. So if you've gotten to a place where you're doing all that you know to do, where you have done the right things and yet it doesn't work, this is when we face what's known as the dark night of the soul. It's that place in which you feel your prayers don't reach any higher than the ceiling. You may have been on your face before God, authentically, genuinely seeking his face, saying your will, not mine, and yet you have silence. That can be so devastating. Think about Job. If anyone had a reason to have distrust toward God, it would have been Job. He lost the most precious things in his world. Yeah, so he lost his possessions. He lost servants. But when it came down to losing children, and that's a whole different thing right there. And so we've got times in our lives that can be transformational to us. The dark night of the soul is a place in which we've been stripped of all of these other things that distract us from God, that take us away from him. And we are deep into a place where all we can do is just take the next breath. What is that about? It's a cliche that you hear. Well, sometimes you don't know that Jesus is all you need until Jesus is all you have. That may speak to you. When I had my dark night of the soul, I might have heard that, but that wasn't really helpful for me. And those mornings when I would go to God and say, why? I want, help me. Was that the time of greatest growth for me? Yeah. Yeah, because all of the things that I had relied on before as a sort of supplement to God, all those things were gone. And it forced me to look inward, to say, okay, what is this really? And God, who do you intend for me to be? Who am I supposed to become? How can I be transformed more into the image of Christ and be at rest with you? Think about your life. If you're younger and you haven't had the dark night of your soul, it's coming. We grow the most in the darkness, like the seed dropped into the soil. And in the dark night of the soul, bright flows the river of God. Now, remember what Paul said. I've learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, living in plenty or in want. And this is the quote that gets the most attention. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. The times that I step back and say, God, I can't do this. This has to be you. Those are the times that powerful things happen in my sessions with clients. Those are the times that powerful things happen in my relationships with others. What we find in psychological research is that meaningless suffering is the most intolerable. And we see a lot of this in churches too, where people want to deliver other people from intolerable suffering, meaningless suffering. God has a purpose in this. Just hang in there. Let's put our suffering into perspective. The little girl you see here, her name's Tegan. And the animal you see to the right is my dog, T. I went through a series of difficult things, and in October, 2 years ago, the doctor says, your dog has cancer. He's only got about 3 to 6 months. That was devastating to me. Well, in November, my good friend lost our beautiful grandbaby, Tegan. It was an accident. I said, what do I say? This thing is just a dog. This beautiful baby is no longer in this world. And what do I say? Have we found any in the 2 years since she's been gone? Has there been any meaning come from that? My friend hasn't told me of any. She's still going through it. But her daughter has found a man that she loves, and she's going on with her life. I heard a quote recently that said, it's not about getting over it, it's about getting through it. It's not about moving on, it's about just continuing. You're not going to leave that little girl behind, but you're going to continue to live. Sometimes we don't have the answers. That's when the faith really gets tested. May we put our own suffering in perspective to say, God, even if I never know the reason for this, whether it passed through your permissive will or something else, help me to still trust you. Like Job saying, though he slay me, yet I will trust in him. That's where we're headed. I'm going to skip the recap of chapters 1 through 3 of Right, but here's an exercise for you with automatic negative thoughts. So be honest with yourself. What's the first thing you think when you see this picture? You don't have to answer that out loud. What about these? The guy in the middle, by the way, those are, I think those are earrings or some sort. Yeah. Rows of them. What do you think? Yes, the guy on the left is playing horseshoes with a toilet seat. What about these? What do you see? What do you think? I think there's a reason my picture right now is right next to the guy you would think of as a geek. We see the first thing and we make a judgment. It's the way the brain is designed, because if we did not make some sort of judgment, categorization, we would be unable to function because we have so much stimulus coming into our brains at one time. We have to filter, we have to sort. But if we slow down and don't be instant in our appraisal, what do we end up seeing? I'm seeing a lot of beauty here. I'm seeing some scary things too. Think about this little guy looking up at a big person saying things loudly. These are ways that we can avoid obstacles to listening. So if I see a guy all tattooed up come into my office and saying, I need help, I've got to be curious. I've got to be open. And I'm going to have some things that I know, if I'm in regular practice of seeking God's instruction, slowing down, listening, I'm going to go, okay, this is a bias that sends me this way. This is a memory that makes me think about this. So this is a continuation of the first 3 chapters of Right. Trust is first and foremost when we are offering trauma counseling. And it's a really fine line between sympathy and empathy. Oh, you poor thing. They're saying, I can't imagine what you're going through. Your pain matters. Emotional contagion, staying other focused. If you have to share something personal, make it really short. Yeah, I've lost a child too. But I can't imagine it under these circumstances. Tell me more about what you're experiencing. And again, we're attending to your soul so that you can attend to theirs. Okay. Where do we get wisdom and how do we learn to accept the world as it is? I love this. This is the full serenity prayer. We know the first one, AA, so many other places, but read the remainder of it. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking, as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is and not as I would have it. Again, automatic negative thinking. This is this, or that person should do this. Taking the sinful world as it is and not as I would have it. Trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will. Does that mean that you will fix all things? No. If I surrender to your will so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Okay. So be ready to finish the rest of the Ortberg. Do your soul care plan and gives this some real thought. When are times that I feel refreshed? How can I build in more relationship with God? How can I be more connected with him and listen more? How can I take care of my body? All of those things are, again, we are integrated beings. So we want to allow for all of those things, and being mindful of the needs of the soul that Ortberg lays out. Your reflection paper will be on last week's reading, and have your reading caught up. You will have your quiz will include a couple of short answers and a short essay at the end of it. You have an hour. I'm not expecting a novel, but I'm looking for evidence that you're internalizing. You're reading it, yes, and you're starting to say, okay, this is making some sense here. Or, okay, it's not making sense. Where do I need to look elsewhere? Do I need to talk to the professor? Well, we do have that scheduled. I look forward to hopefully seeing you on Zoom. So God bless you. And hopefully I'll see all of you in our Zoom meeting.